Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. Hey, folks, welcome to Friday. Not our usual Wednesday for a Facebook Live, but the session just ended yesterday at noon, as you know. We're glad to have Dr. Paul Krebs, political science professor at the University of New Mexico, Poli Sci Department. We're going to get into some of the interesting things that happened in this 30-day session. But let me start, Dr. Krebs, just your top line reaction, as they say on the big shows, to what just transpired, meaning we had an awful lot of things, and we'll start to get into detail about this. An awful lot of things that are huge issues tried to get done in a 30-day session. I'm so curious, just from your point of view as a political science professor here in New Mexico, is our session lengths just not viable anymore in a fast-moving world?
You know, I really think they aren't viable anymore. I mean, you know, you've got in a 30-day session, it's supposed to be about the budget. The governor, though, can put things on her call, legislative items that are non-budgetary in nature. And even, you know, just that one person having that ability to do that, that agenda can get packed pretty quickly. And in our modern world, things can be really complicated. Just talking about crime, talking about environmental protection, you know, the budgetary implications and economic implications of different tax laws and tax changes and so forth. All of these things require a lot of thought, a lot of discussion, a lot of effort to get to some kind of agreement. And you know, in a 30-day session, it's really hard. And you're talking about, you know, having citizen legislators who are taking time away from, you know, their families and their livelihoods and so forth to serve in these roles. And it's a very tall order. So yeah, I think, you know, having a discussion about increasing the length of our legislative sessions and perhaps you know, increasing the staff capacity would make our legislature function more effectively in the modern world, and you know, allow them to do the things that you know, it's clear that voters want, that our residents want, that our state needs to accomplish. And we have this kind of frustration after every legislative session. It's like we ran out of time.
Right.
It's, you know, it's a common story.
Absolutely. Hey, I want to apologize. I did the very thing I swore I would not do and call you Paul Krebs. I went ahead and did it. I'm so sorry. I'm sure you've heard it before. I'm sorry.
I have heard it. I have heard it once or twice in town. Yes, if I'm related, I am not.
Yeah, there you go. My fault. Well, it allows us to clear that up by getting it wrong. So I appreciate that. Just in case anyone was wondering.
Yeah.
Interesting. Dr. Krebs, I got to go right to something that's just so interesting to me is the use of dummy bills. Something this session just was sort of like beyond the beyond for dummy bills. I mean, we've seen them before. There may be even an argument in some capacities for them. But could you explain to the folks what they are and what happened here with the unbelievable use of them this session?
Well, I can't really, you know, I can't really speak to, you know, why they were used, or, you know, if they were used more this time around than in previous sessions, because it's hard to compare this session with other ones, just simply because we're still in COVID. It's not normal functioning. So, you know, dummy bills are just really what they are, is they're just sort of legislative vehicles that are used to sort of to introduce legislation or to move legislation after the deadline for filing bills has passed. And so, you know, it's a legislative maneuver. It's a tool that leadership can use to, you know, keep a legislative idea viable after the point at which, you know, that sort of initial deadline for filing bills has passed. And so it's a, you know, it's a bit unorthodox in terms of process. You know, there's a sort of generic title given to to a dummy bill. There's no author, listed.
Hmm.
There's no sort of bill, when bills are introduced, they're assigned to committees, there's none of that stuff. So, it all happens in an unorthodox way.
Hmm.
Legislatures can determine how they function, so long as it's consistent with the Constitution.
Hmm.
The legislatures, they decide on their rules and how they function, and so it's from that standpoint, it's okay.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. I want to hitch this thought we're on here about dummy bills to the Hydrogen Act that did not happen. It was almost like a way to bring something from the dead. It's a
Yeah,
very interesting
exactly.
way to use these dummy bills. But I'm curious where you feel the voter is left in this process. 'Cause it's awfully hard, even given the challenges of COVID and Zoom and all that kind of thing. It's very hard for the citizen to track their citizen legislatures moves when you have amendments, 160 pages on top of a 4-page original bill, and no one has time to read these things. So I'm curious, where does the voter get left off in this?
Well, clearly, there is there is a kind of a lack of a lack of transparency with these sorts of things.
Hmm.
Um, Large, complicated bills. We see this in the U.S. Congress all the time, where members of Congress they don't read the stuff they're voting on, simply because they don't
Right.
have enough time.
Hmm.
Bills become longer and more complicated, often on purpose, so that you can have enough stuff in there to build the coalitions you need to build in order to pass legislation. So you kind of, you build it bigger so that you can give more stuff to more people to get them to say, yeah, I
Right.
can't not vote for this.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Um, the sort of bigger issue of transparency, I think it matters more. I think it matters a bit more to folks in the media, reform groups. I think for the average person out there, what they want,
Mhm.
they don't care so much about the inside politics stuff that's going on here.
Mhm.
What they want to see is they want to see results. They want to see a legislature that functions to serve their interests, to address the challenges they face, to address community conditions and statewide conditions, to move the state forward. And so, on some level, I think, for the average voter, this kind of stuff is just like, yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
not particularly important. What's important is
Mhm.
sort of what's done at the end and whether it improves people's lives.
Mhm. Fair enough. Process is a difficulty. I mean, there's
Yeah.
professional citizens that follow these things, and there are people that live their lives and they don't follow these things. So
Right.
I appreciate that. One of the things I always dig about poli sci departments and people that are working in this is the understanding of how to. You just mentioned a second ago how to break ideas, and this is I'm going to talk about the Hydrogen Development Act here. I really can't. When I think back, I can't think of many opportunities that are generational, as the governor sort of positioned this, that were approached with such a thin, run up to such an enormous idea. And sometimes politics is the idea of holding, something under someone's nose and convincing them it smells like an orange. Do you know what I mean? It just
Yeah.
really was very little effort. I'm so curious from your point of view how the art of the deal for the Hydrogen Act went to you, because to me that's a year and a half long discussion, frankly, statewide with a lot of stakeholders, lots of landowners. I'm curious where you saw the hydrogen thing either rise or fail.
I mean, it sort of surprised me in general that it was sort of coming up,
Yeah.
because it's not the kind of thing that we've talked much about in the past. And it seems to be linked to legislation at the federal level and money that's available at the federal level to encourage these kinds of
Right.
developments and transition to this kind of energy source. Um, you know, this is one of those things that citizen legislatures have a very hard time dealing with, because it's extraordinarily complex.
Hmm.
And when you have a situation like this, we even on things that we say payday. Here's an example, sort of the payday lending act. We've talked about that for years, and in
Hmm.
terms of the complexity of that relative to a transition of sort of energy to this new hydrogen hub concept. The complexity of the payday lender bill, that's not that complex compared to what we're talking
Right.
about here. And
Yeah.
we talked about that for a long time. And so, this is just it's going to need more time. It's going to need more thought. There's a
Hmm.
lot of stuff that just has to happen outside of the legislative session, given the nature of our sessions. And that if that doesn't happen, it's really difficult to produce success on things in a 30-day or a 60-day session.
How do you even have that kind of a conversation about generational energy change without a full-time legislature? I really don't know how you can even possibly have it, because you can't fill in the gaps with interim committees, in road shows and Zoom meetings. I mean, we're talking about a commitment to a form of energy here. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Right. And so, and what you've got in, certainly the rural parts of this state, with regards to these, hydrogen hubs and sort of the jobs
Hmm.
and economic development that's going to happen, you've got an immediate concern, right? And so there's a lot of support for it in those places because it's immediate. It's something that we think is going to help with jobs. It's going to help with,
That's right.
it's immediately going to help the transition from coal-fired plants and so forth that are being shut down or powered down in some sense, to excuse the pun.
Hmm.
But that's immediate. But then there's these longer term things that have to do with climate change itself. And we say,
Hmm.
well, climate change, and even there, it's like, is it a longer term thing? It's not, right? Because we're in a
Hmm.
climate crisis. And so you got people
That's
saying,
right.
this is a crisis and we want to do this about it. You got other people saying, well, our immediate needs are this, and they don't
Hmm.
always jive. So
That's
it
right.
is hard. And we'll
Well, you
just
mentioned
see.
you mentioned earlier coalition building. And I have to wonder if this hydrogen hub deal exposed a rift in the Democratic Party that we might not have given enough credence to. The rift naturally exists as we know it. Environmentalists, versus the very center of the Democratic Party that might lean a little towards business. That's always been there. However, something seemed a little more vigorous from the environmental side, and it was almost as if the folks that wanted this hydrogen deal had never even talked to them. For gosh sake, it was an amazing thing. I'm curious your sense of the opposition and how it shaped up within that party, the politics there. How do you see that?
Again, I think I think there's just a real difference between sort of rural Democrats,
Hmm.
and kind of the needs that are connected to sort of economic development and these um, the day-to-day sort of existence versus more progressive Democrats that may be
Hmm.
representing urban areas that have a different kind of just are going to have a different take on this.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think it does expose that rift. It's not like that, as you said, Gene. It's not like we don't know that that's there. It is.
Hmm.
But these kinds of issues, especially when you got things that again are sort of immediate, um, bread and butter kinds of issues in one
Hmm.
part of
Hmm.
a Democratic coalition and people that are, the Democrats that are representing those folks versus another. Yeah, you're gonna see it, and so it's gonna take some effort and time to negotiate those differences to come up with
That's
something
right.
that's gonna be palatable for both sides.
Hmm. Let's talk about crime. Obviously, that was the big issue going into the session, and by the governor's own word, indeed, of course. But again, something seemed to go a little hinky in the process, and we had a lot of movement. We had, boy, there was the use of moving, you know, content between bills, which happened
Yeah.
with the Voting Rights
Mhm.
Act and the crime bill. But for the crime bill specifically, I'm curious from your point of view where you think the public might be sitting currently watching what didn't come out of Santa Fe with so much noise going into Santa Fe for this session about crime, even knowing, the legislators have a difficult task on this, what's your sense of how the crime thing shaped up?
I think they've done a lot of good. I mean, I think they've done a lot of really good things.
Hmm.
Recruitment and retention pay is a good thing. I think the issue around ankle monitors. I think that's a very good thing.
Hmm.
But the most visceral thing with regards to the crime challenge is when people get released, people who are where the allegation is that they've committed a violent crime,
Hmm.
and they get released, they get pretrial release, and they do something else. I mean, that's the visceral kind of thing that really gets people angry and looking at the system and saying, how do we ever move forward? How do we ever address the violent crime problem in big metros like Albuquerque? How do we ever
Hmm.
do that if we can't hold people? And so, as a public policy, so there's a policy debate
Hmm.
on this that says, well, that's really not the problem.
Right.
That's really not the problem. The problem is we need to be able to arrest people, and we need punishment to be swift. And we need that, we need to be able to do that. We need to more effectively, we've got to be able to arrest people, and then have a speedy trial and all of that. That's sort of there's this policy issue, but in terms of the politics of it, the visceral thing is going to be more. It's going to be more important, right? Because there's
Right.
sort of heady kind of policy debate, and it's probably correct on the merits, but again, there's this visceral kind of political issue around releasing people who are where the allegation is that they've committed a violent crime.
Right. I
So
have to agree. It is visceral. You can almost picture it if you're a regular citizen. Are there political implications this election season for Democrats on crime, in your view, Dr. Krebs?
well, I think the history of political parties in the United States, and I think voters' perceptions of the political parties on the issue of crime is that the Republicans sort of own the issue of crime and law and order,
Hmm.
and Democrats do not. So, one of the things I think is, I mean, I don't, of course, know this for a fact, but certainly in the politics of an election year like this, Democrats are trying to get out in front of that particular political dynamic where the Republicans may be saying, look, don't elect Democrats because look what happens when you do that, in places like Albuquerque and other big areas where Democrats are in charge. We got a Democratic governor, we got a Democratic legislature, and the crime problem's out of control. So
Hmm.
yeah, they may be on the defensive on this question. Come the fall, they have there are things that they can point to of a bipartisan nature that came out of this session. But again, I think
Hmm.
that one big one,
Right.
the most visceral one, that's still out there.
Yeah, very much so. I agree with that. Would it be your sense that there's a possibility of a special session regarding crime? Would that be politically a good move for Democrats?
Based on what came out of the session, I would say probably no. I don't know if I don't know if there's any. I don't have a sense that there's any room for moving forward on that core issue.
Hmm.
If they were able to figure something out fairly soon, then yeah, that might be something that would be advantageous, certainly for Democrats this cycle, especially the governor.
Right.
If they could work on something and get it passed,
Hmm.
some kind of compromise that would allow the folks who are concerned about some of the civil liberties issues involved here, and of course the issue of stopping violent criminals. If
That's
there's
right.
compromise on that, then I think it would redound to the benefit of Democrats for sure.
Hmm. Well, there is some risk, certainly. I can hear it sort of in the background of what you're saying, that is if they do go to a special on crime and at the back end of it come up with something that's really not that satisfactory, there's political implications there for on an election season as well, I would
Yeah,
imagine.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Especially you don't, go ahead, sorry. Mhm.
I was going to say politicians are sort of naturally risk averse.
Yes.
You know,
Well, it would be the lone spotlight. You wouldn't have any other legislation to hide behind. Literally, the whole focus would be from the entire state on crime, and you got to deliver. So
it
I
would be
agree
a
with you.
make or it would be a make or break moment for sure.
That's right. I'd have to agree with that. Absolutely. Hence, I think you're right. I don't think you're going to see a call for for a special. That's for sure. Hey, we had an interesting turn of events. Certainly, with Speaker Egolf announcing his resignation. The timing was certainly interesting. None of us really know why. I'm sure he'll let us know at some point what the actual, if there was actual reasoning behind it. But on the politics side of it, going into an election year, and we're not going to do predictions here because it's just too far away. But
Yeah.
I'm curious in the climate that we're in, if there's a certain type of a personality politically that might work right now. Do you know what I mean? Because you mentioned earlier we're in sort of a law and order phase of life. I mean, all that kind of thing. Any sense of that? What type of person in leadership would work at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, you know, the sort of it's really hard to sort of to think about this, you know, sort of down
Yeah.
the road. I mean, the climate, I mean, look at what we did this session, you know, we're spending 14% more, but we're cutting taxes. You know, we didn't get voting reform. We didn't get the
Hmm.
environmental stuff.
Hmm.
They got some stuff on crime. You know, that's an indication that you know, that either you know, that sort of more conservative forces in the legislature maybe, you know, you know, moving ahead, that they're achieving some success.
Hmm.
As far as a leadership decision on the House side, you know, the number one goal of leadership is really to sort of keep peace in the family, so to
Hmm.
speak. So,
Hmm.
you know, having somebody in that role that can bring together, you know, the different sides, different facets of the Democratic Party in the House, the progressives and the more conservative interests, having somebody that's important.
Hmm.
And that will be important going forward. But then there's, you know, the numbers, and so you've got more sort of progressive Democrats representing the urban areas, vis-a-vis the Democrats in the rural areas. So numbers wise, I think that you know, would suggest that there's going to be somebody who's, you know, kind of along the lines of Brian Egolf, or a little bit to the left.
Hmm.
Trump.
Interesting point there. I got to wonder if there's going to be pressure at some point to have a more rural-based legislator in that speaker position. If there's any advantage for the party, given the times, I don't know personally. I one way or the other. But do you have a sense of that? If a rural legislator to be in that speaker role would make an appreciable difference in the body right now?
Well, not right. I mean, I don't, not right now. I mean, because we've
Yeah.
just concluded the session, and then we'll have elections in the fall. So I mean, it'll depend upon what sort of you
Hmm.
know, what the policy mood is coming out of the election, and sort of where
Right.
we think we want to go. That'll be a really important thing, that will, I think, influence the selection of the next speaker. The other thing I'd
Yeah.
note is that, you know, you could elect a progressive Democrat in the role of speaker, and, you know, just being in that role, that doesn't mean that everything that's coming out of the leadership's office, leader's office, is going to be on the progressive end of the spectrum, because
Hmm.
they change in the role. I mean, well, once you're in the role, then you're confronted with,
Right.
oh yeah, I've got to lead this caucus, not just
That's right.
dictate this caucus. And, you know, that can change how people behave otherwise.
Hmm.
And so I think that's an important thing to consider as we move forward.
That's
Being
right.
in a leadership role is a different thing than being in a normal legislative role.
That's right. Another little point there too. I appreciate the sliding up the timeline there. I sort of misspoke there, but you're right. It'll depend on who the governor is, of course, as well, and that'll set a tone as well. If the governor holds, that's one thing. If she doesn't hold, that's a whole nother decision point
Right.
for a leader role. Hmm.
Exactly, for sure.
Yeah,
Because now to
absolutely. It'd
get
be
anything
interesting.
done, you're going to have somebody who can negotiate with somebody from the other party. And
That's right.
in this climate, that's a difficult thing. We're
Yep.
not as polarized as the nation as a whole at the state level, but, you know, it's moving in that direction. So it'd be
That's
really,
right.
really difficult if somebody from the other party gets control.
Yep, I think it's pretty clear-eyed. There is a lot of shifting sand right now. But speaking of the governor, she dropped a bit of a bombshell in that post, the presser following the legislative session, but regarding masks, in dropping the use of masks. And I found it interesting that she chose to say it was not a political decision, or politics didn't really make a data point in her decision. I don't know about that. Something that's a part of me. Is there any downside politically, to ending the mandate at this point? What the politics behind it? I'm curious about your thoughts there.
Well, you know, I noticed that too in the press conference about it. It's not a political decision, and anything a politician does is political. I mean, it's right. They behave politically,
Right.
and that's okay. That's the
Yes.
thing is that's okay. That's what they do. That's their job. And so, every people always have that. Well, is that politically motivated? Well, of course it is. I mean,
Hmm.
because they're politicians, and that's okay. There's information though that she has at her disposal, and
Hmm.
information is suggesting that doing this is a reasonable course of action.
Hmm.
And she's now got some precedent with other Democrats in other parts of the country, other Democratic governors and other states that are lifting the mask mandate. It was set to expire in early March anyway, so we're just moved it up a few weeks. The downside for the governor would be if there's an additional spike and we move too quickly to
Right.
remove the mask mandate. I mean, that is like, oh, the governor can't get a handle on this issue, and it's a disaster, and we've got crime out of control, and all these
Right.
other kinds of things in the environment, and then so it's risky. It's risky some, but
Hmm.
on the other hand, it will make people who haven't been her biggest fans happier. So in that sense.
That's right. Let's finish where we started, and I appreciate your time today. That's for sure. We're talking with Dr. Timothy Krebs from the UNM Poli-Sci Department, where he is a professor there. And I want to just finish with the length of time that we dedicate ourselves to this with our legislative session. In your mind, Doctor, is it a full-time legislature or bust, or would 6 months work? Would 90 days work? In your scenario, can we sneak up on this somehow? What would be optimal for you?
Yes, we certainly can sneak up on this. It doesn't have to be there. I cannot imagine a scenario in which we decide as a state to change our system to look like California's, which is
Right.
essentially the California legislature is essentially like the United States Congress in terms
Right.
of its level of professionalization. So no, I don't see a scenario in which we ever go to that model. We don't have the population. We don't have the need for that.
Hmm.
So yeah, I could see something that moves us in the direction of kind of a hybrid model between a citizen legislature and a more professionalized one. And increasing the length of the session is something I think that would be beneficial. But the other thing that would be probably even more beneficial is to increase the number of staff that work in the legislature, because what the legislature lacks most of all, in my judgment, is it lacks that capacity to handle big, complex issues. And this is not a knock on our state legislators
Hmm.
at all. I mean, they're very bright, hardworking public servants,
Right.
and hats off to them.
Mhm.
But it's just a kind of impossible task, really, to do the kind of work we expect of them in these short sessions without that sort of staff capacity to help them sift through the complexity of these things
Mhm.
and all the nuances and potential consequences of legislative action. I mean,
Yep.
so that's what
As a,
I
as a, I couldn't agree more. As a former congressional staffer, it
yes,
really does come down to staff. They do everything, not everything, but you know what I'm saying.
absolutely.
You cannot expect people who are running businesses, running farms, to sit down and dedicate themselves to hacking through every day, these incredibly complex things like you're saying.
Yeah.
I got to think that has a possibility of a chance, Dr. Krebs, of some. We have the money now, literally, to
Oh,
start paying for professional staff, don't we?
Well, we do. I mean, the budget, the budget's really grown tremendously. I mean, I can
Yeah,
remember a time when it was like, you know, $5.8 billion, and then it was like
right.
$6.2 billion. It sort of stayed that way forever. Now we're up over eight. So it's kind of like,
Right.
eye-popping in some ways. But yeah, I think it's there. And I think it would be very, but and we're not talking, there is staff, right? There's
Sure.
staff
Yeah,
in the legislative finance committee staff. They do a
that's
tremendous
right.
job.
They're brilliant. Yeah.
They're doing a tremendous job. Education study committee, legislative services, they do tremendous work. But what we don't have is that sort of personal, individual staff for individual legislators helping with legislation to formulate it, run interference, talk to people, develop coalitions, compromises, information gathering.
That's right.
So
That's right. Comparisons to other states, data. We
Comparison.
need a lot of data going into any big decision, all that stuff, just stuff that they
Absolutely.
do. And I couldn't agree with you more about the California system. I grew up in a state that had a full-time legislature, and honestly, at times it just acted like a AAA farm, team
Yeah,
to the U.S. Congress.
right.
Honestly, that's what people are there for, was to showboat their way into the Congress. And we're not looking for that here. We need problems solved
We need
instead of
problem.
people looking.
That's right.
That's right.
Yes. And
Exactly
Gene,
right.
like you, I'm a former staffer too in the California legislature before I
Ah,
decided to do this. So I saw that up close, just the work that was done and just the complexity of stuff. So yeah, I mean,
that's right.
you know,
It's amazing. You get 4 people behind the scenes working 80 hours a week, and we think we can have this part-time legislator do the same thing on their time. It's just not going to work.
right.
Oh, my Lord. Dr.
Yeah.
Timothy Krebs from the UNM Poli-Sci Department, where you're a professor. Thank you so much for your time on this. I realize it's very difficult to follow up a session almost immediately
Right.
and have some opinions formed on it. So we really appreciate you taking a walk with us here and doing the thing here on New Mexico PBS. Thank you very much. We'll check in with you again on that. And folks, tonight at 7 o'clock, we're going to have some coverage with some reporters from all over the state to talk about what happened on the session as well. So we'll see you tonight at 7 o'clock. Dr. Krebs, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
All right.